Welcome to ScaleUp Radio. In today's episode, we explore competitive advantage with Adrian Burden, a tech entrepreneur and author of Start to Exit. Adrian's diverse background spans material science, venture capital, and anti-counterfeiting tech, and leading all to his current roles in innovation and blockchain SaaS. Key takeaways include competitive advantage goes beyond a USP. It's about true differentiation. Niching down and deeply understanding your sector is part of what creates that edge, that competitive advantage. Protecting your intellectual property with trademarks and cybersecurity, we talk a little bit about that, and focusing on quality and agility over the cost of sustainable growth. So we'll discuss protecting technology, leveraging organized processes, and crafting unique selling propositions in this short, focused episode of Scale Radio. Stay tuned as Adrian shares insights on maintaining a competitive edge in today's market. And make sure you don't miss any future episodes by subscribing to ScaleUp Radio wherever you like to listen to your podcast. You can also nominate a guest for ScaleUp Radio if you know someone with an interesting scale-up story, and you can find out how in the show notes below, as well as a link to the original interview with Adrian Burden that's had multiple downloads across many countries.
So, Adrian, welcome to Scale Up Club. So if you'd like to introduce yourself to us all, and maybe tell us a bit about your journey and your thoughts on competitive advantage and your amazing now 2 books that you have now published. So over to you.
No, thanks very much, Granger. Nice to see you all. So my name's Adrian Burden, and as was just mentioned, I'm kind of a tech entrepreneur. So my background is in technology. I was actually a material scientist originally, and I have a PhD in material science. And my first part of this sort of startup tech journey, I actually worked for a venture capital financed startup company near Oxford when I was a lot younger. And that gave me the first sort of introduction to what it was like to work in quite a high energy startup where people were concerned about money running out, developing a new product, taking the risk on some technology that hadn't really been tested. But I was just an employee. I was one of the first employees, and I grew that company over a couple of years, probably 4 years, as they raised venture capital finance, and I helped the directors in various aspects of that work. And that was a really interesting, low responsibility introduction, really. It wasn't up to me to raise the money, and it wasn't up to me to keep the whole thing running. But I was embedded in that, and that was a really excellent experience. I then moved to Singapore, where I worked partly as an academic again in a research institute, but I spun a company out with a colleague. And that's one of the ones I talk a little bit about on the Scale Up Radio podcast, but also is what resulted in me writing the book Start to Exit. And there we took this company as a tech spin out from effectively a research institute, got some customers, raised angel and venture capital finance, then went through the acquisition and the sale. And it was quite a short, sharp journey in that sense. This all happened over a period of about 4 years. And during that period, I was the founding CEO and my colleague, the CTO, and we really were taking a technology out of a laboratory, turning it into a product, selling it, and at the same time doing all the things you need to do in a business in terms of looking at the competitive advantage, growing the foundations, worrying about finance, HR, marketing, sales, etc. So that's where I really learned a lot about what it takes to grow a business, particularly a complicated technology business where there are a lot of moving parts and unknowns. And also where I got to understand a little bit about the competitive advantage and what set us apart and how it was that we were able to progress. So I'll come back to a few of those things in a second. Just to sort of continue the story, I eventually, as I say, we went through an exit. I moved back to the UK. And then since being in the UK, I'm based in Malvern. We actually run an innovation centre up on the hills here in Malvern. And I have a business that's more consultancy focused, but I've also now started, I have been for a few years, running a software as a service company, which is also in that sort of pre-high growth phase, still a little bit startup, but we're trying to scale it now. And again, I talked about that in the podcast, and it's to do with partly blockchain, partly certificates, but it's very software focused. So it has some advantages over some of the things I was doing previously, which involved products and physical items as well. And again, right at this moment, wrestling with the whole idea of what is our competitive advantage? How can we grow quickly? What are our competitors doing? So come full circle really, and back in the melee again, trying to sort these things out. And then just also as an aside, over the years, I've been running the Malvern Festival Innovation that some of you might be aware of. It's taken a little bit of a back seat in the last couple of years because I'm so busy with the main software business, but we do still run the Festival Innovation. At the moment, we're focused mainly on a family day each year, and hopefully that will grow. And we've got some exciting things coming out soon, so we'll explain those in the future for those that are interested. So in terms of competitive advantage, I know there'll be some questions, but from my point of view as a technologist, one of the things that most people think of as a competitive advantage is being able to protect your technology. So that's the intellectual property really of the business. And when it's a technology, that's relatively easy to conceptualize because we're talking about patents, design rights, and know-how. But actually any business has all of these aspects in there. If you're not a technology business, you still have plenty of intellectual property around your business process, around your business contacts, how you systemize what you're doing internally, how you go about winning customers and satisfying customers. So I often think a competitive advantage in a business is partly about the protection of those things, but actually identifying them and keeping those advantages close to your chest really, and exploiting them as much as you can. So some of the simple things I think are actually being organized within the business. If you are agile, organized and receptive, actually you can be quite a strong competitor for those that aren't, because you can get onto opportunities much more quickly. You can steer the business after those opportunities, whilst other companies that don't have that strategic advantage are kind of left in your wake. So even if you're not a high technology business and you don't think intellectual property is important, I would counter that and say, really take a good look at your processes and see how those differentiate you from the people you're competing with. The other thing is barriers to entry. So in a very regulated market, let's say pharmaceuticals and so on, there is a barrier to entry. You've got to go through a lot of hurdles to be able to develop a product. And once you've got over those hurdles, you have a competitive advantage over those that have yet to get over those. So if you can steer some of your business into a market where there are hurdles that you're very comfortable getting over, that can also give you an advantage and set you apart. And that might be just looking adjacent to maybe a sector you're in and seeing where there's something you understand, but you could apply yourself to that's a slightly more protected market. And that can actually help give you a bit of a leap forward in terms of getting you perhaps over a difficult business period where you're looking for customers and so on, because you can secure and ring fence something specific. The last thing that people often talk about with USPs, unique selling points and propositions, are around what I break into three bits: time, cost, and quality. So you're usually competing around those three things. Cost is an obvious one. Do you make your product or service more cost effective or cheaper? And does that set you apart? But also think about the quality aspect. So how good is your product or service, and therefore can it command a higher price? And that can also be a differentiator, not just in terms of quality, but in terms of user experience and the advantage it brings to the end user. So is it just 10 times better, and therefore you can command a higher price? That can give you some advantage. And the other thing is the time aspect. So are you able to deliver more quickly is the simple example there, but also can you spend time with your customers developing the product specifically for them and build a relationship and a rapport? And that can actually help you be set apart from others that are trying to nibble at your own market. So those were the sort of things I thought set the scene.
Super, fantastic. A really good intro and opening there around USP, around how to find your USPs as well. So from your experience, all of us small business owners, we're all trying to carve our way into blue water. If we've read the book, the blue ocean strategy, get out of those red waters where everybody else is fighting for. From your experience, though, what went right and what went wrong through your journey to find that unique selling point that allowed you to grow and scale your business?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think one of the issues with the company I was talking about that we were in Singapore, that was an anti-counterfeiting technology company, and basically dealt with the problem of counterfeit products. Now, the issue there was actually we had a myriad of opportunities, and I think it was all about focus and really defining where we wanted to be. So to give you an example, we could put anti-counterfeiting technology onto automotive, aerospace, medical, food, luxury goods. Now, all of those are incredibly complicated sectors actually to get into. They all have their own nuances, their own supply chains, and so forth. So what we decided to do, and we actually didn't do this particularly well, it took us a while, was to try and focus on one area. And it actually came about because our first customer helped define that. So we ended up being in the automotive industry, really, and dealing with counterfeits there. That gave us some focus, and there was plenty of opportunity within the automotive industry. There's lots of components that have problems with fake products and imitations. And our competitive advantage really started to derive from that by understanding the sector and how it operated. And the automotive sector is complicated: tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, just-in-time manufacturing, regulation, etc. And it's international, so it's all over the place, lots of different players. And by focusing specifically on that sector, we got to know it much better. We could differentiate our product from other competitors that way. What we didn't do very well was focus early on. So we were still a bit distracted by some of the other sectors and exerting energy there, which was a learning exercise on its own, and distracted us from just getting on with maybe securing more customers in the automotive. Having said all that, it was actually a pharmaceutical packaging company that acquired us. So it cuts both ways. If you're very focused, you could miss an opportunity. And the opportunity was that in this case, there was a lot of counterfeiting in medicines. And the pharmaceutical packaging company was really interested in the technology as well. So it was only because we weren't super focused that we entertained talking with them and exploring that as an opportunity. So yeah, it's a tricky question.
Yeah, so focus, or niching is one of those opportunities to try and find that, and helps us do that. And you gave some examples there. But you talked about your USP in time, cost, or quality. We're small business owners just like yourself. What advice would you give us to go about trying to find some of that within the business? Because every day we're trying to manage the whirlwind of the business. How do we go about trying to find some of that?
Yeah, so again, very difficult. I always think that the cost one is a difficult one to compete on as a small company. The only advantage you've got really is that you're small, and perhaps your overheads are artificially low, partly because you may not be paying yourself as much as you perhaps deserve. And if you're not careful, you keep eroding that by bringing the cost down, effectively the price of offering. So in a small business, I would always try and focus on the quality advantages and the time advantages. In other words, the fact that you can deliver particularly more quickly or just be more agile to the requirements of your customer. So if you focus on those two, you can then start to look at, well, what do customers value compared to my competitors because of my quality or my time advantage, and then focus on that. And with any luck, your customers might start to compete on price, but not quality. And so when your clients get burnt down the line, they'll come back to you, because I certainly believe those two pillars are much more sustainable for growth. So focus on those two, I would say. And actually, part of your competitive advantage is to understand what your competitors do. So really focus on what companies are competing and how do they compete? What are their advantages or their perceived advantages? And that's a worthwhile exercise to take.
Okay, excellent. And we'll open up to questions from the floor in just a moment. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. Kevin will facilitate that in just a moment. So how do we go about protecting it? Maybe we've got something internally, maybe we've got something, a brand or something. What's your thoughts around protection and making sure that we keep that USP as we grow and scale?
Yeah, so I think it's really important, and to put in processes in the business to do that. So again, it comes down to, first of all, identifying these things. I mentioned intellectual property in general. So the sort of buckets that these things sit into, if you're a technology business or you're product manufacturer, you'll have things like patents, trademarks, design rights, and then know-how, which is really where you're keeping it secret, and then copyright, which is the written stuff that you write. All of those things can be protected to different degrees. You can spend money doing it by registering some of those, but also just keeping an eye on what you consider in your business to be a trade secret, confidential information, and so on, and making sure your staff understand that as well. There's no, you don't want to leak, and you want them to value it too. So it's partly training, and also, again, comes back to organization and being methodical with the information you've got. So if you've got customer lists and you've got some business plans, obviously make sure that people in the business that see those understand that those are confidential information, because even small amounts of that information, that sensitive information, in the wrong hands can really affect your competitive advantage. And the other thing, cybersecurity is a broad term we hear a lot about, but that's important as well, to understand how to make, because we pretty much do everything now with IT, make sure that your IT processes are secure. Even simple things around passwords, who has access to different resources, and so forth. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Adrian, thank you very much. I always learn everything we meet new exciting people, and some really thoughts there about USP around time, not just cost and quality. So, Kevin, any questions from the floor?
Well, the first question is from Emma, and it plays a little bit to what Adrian was just saying. But Emma's asking, do you think it's important to trademark your name or logo for your business, even when you're still small?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think if you'd asked me a few years ago, I'd have said no, probably not. Now I'm coming round more to thinking it is valuable, because it's actually not that expensive to do, certainly in the UK. I would certainly get advice on doing it, even just some cursory advice from either someone else that's done it, or you can, of course, go to a trademark lawyer, a company that helps with these things. Why do I think it's important? Well, because you do, with the internet and so on, it's much easier for people to find brands and start mimicking them elsewhere. And we actually had a case in Blockmark, the company I'm working in now, where there was another company trading effectively with the term Blockmark, impinging a bit on what we were doing. And we actually had filed the trademark, and we were able to go after them. Didn't go to court or anything, literally a letter to them to ask them to stop doing it, cease and desist effectively. And that was valuable to us, to stop confusion in the market.
Very good. Excellent. Helen Bowers asking your thoughts on whether it's more difficult to protect in a service industry. So Helen runs out of bookkeeping, for example.
Yeah, it is, in the sense that obviously it's more intangible. So things like patents and so on don't apply. But there's still plenty to protect there. And I think it does come down to your internal processes and how you manage those, particularly with your staff. And that can lead things like lead generation in your business, obviously interacting with the client, and perhaps adding value services to those, and keeping those in effect from your competitors. So partly, you need to advertise what you offer, but if you're not careful, you're playing into the hand of your competitors. You go, oh, yeah, that's an interesting service, I'm going to offer that as well. So in a way, one of the ways to get around this is to do a bit of closed marketing and advertising. So just talk to your existing customers about what you offer beyond what they're using. So you're not shouting it out too much, and that gives you an advantage to start offering those services without others realizing.
One more question, Kevin, time-wise. Brilliant.
Well, actually, I think it's more of a comment from Craig Helen around the benefits of having that core focus, but actually they do keep their eye on other areas as well, because then that sometimes that feeds back into giving them even more advantage on their core market focus. I think so, learnings that they gain perhaps from doing things a little bit left field. So I think it's just a comment rather than a question.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Thank you for your time.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if you're building and scaling your own business, you might well be interested in our book, The Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a practical handbook around scaling a business in a structured way. And you can order a copy on all your favorite online retailers, including an audio version, or you can find it and other supporting resources on our website, www.esusgroup.co.uk. That's esusgroup.co.uk, which is esusgroup.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.